Good job. So I'm Kent Anderson. I'm CEO publisher at Striatus, JBJS, and I'm going to talk a little bit about intrapreneurship in a broader sense with some specific examples. It's going to be messy because intrapreneurship is. Just because you say it doesn't mean you can do it. And so I'm just going to dive in and see how it goes. So I kind of am a serial intrapreneur. Over my career, I've done things at online-only sections of journals, invented PowerPoint slide sets and slides. Had a beta site at any New England Journal of Medicine where it was all about intrapreneurship, where we developed new features. Created a set of publications based on search engines. Scholarly Kitchen is actually the SSP, being intrapreneurial. So it's fun. But it is messy, so I'm going to try to draw some principles from what I've learned over the years. One thing is that Grumpy Cat is quite correct. There are two things that people don't like. They don't like the way things are, and they don't like change. So there are a couple of ways to read that. I'm going to linger over this graphic. You're going to be surprised how much I can get out of this picture of a cat. In some cultures, that means let's not change because we're going to come up against resistance. We're going to come up against challenges and negativity, and people don't like that. And they may even have their knives out to make it so that it's a little bit painful for you to change. But on the risk level, these things are actually equally risky. How things are and changing, to me, you have to point out the risk of the status quo. Sometimes the status quo is extremely risky, and if you don't innovate and you don't change, you don't see how risky it is, and you get surprised. So this is an attitude you can come across. You can overcome it. This is my current favorite quote. I read it this morning right before the plenary. Technology is disrupting every distribution platform. Consumers are redefining decades of consumption habits. Seizing the opportunity will require, to emphasize a point that Nico made, long-term investment. To emphasize a point that John made, a large appetite for transformation. Risk is inherent to the endeavor, as well as tolerance for intermittent failure. Mm-hmm. And I think that speaks to the point that you need to have enough going on that you're not so wrapped up in a single point of failure that your whole innovation system crumbles if you just do one thing wrong. You need to have enough going on. I'll talk a little bit about setting up the infrastructure for that. So when I started at JBJS, it was a single journal publisher. Had been around for a good long time. We're celebrating our 125th anniversary as a publication this year. But a single journal publisher. And my goal was to transform from the business of a journal and the culture that had and the practices that had and the habits that had to the business with a journal. And that has required a fair amount of transformation, and but luckily there was quite an appetite for that, especially among some of the greatest forces of nature at that organization. So to take issue a little bit with, there are multiple ways to, there's a wide range of normal in innovation. There are lots of ways to do it. And so there's no playbook. That's one thing I'll talk about later. I actually don't like to look at people who have risen to the top of editorial ladders or even professional ladders, especially if you have a small group of those and a large group of practitioners, which is common in medicine. You need to go outside and look at the practitioners, because sometimes the top of the pyramid can become quite disassociated from the rest of it. So we engaged a company, IDEO. They do user-centered design and observational research. And that really helped us get in touch with the market. I was coming from medicine, and you go to surgery, that's one step away. You go to orthopedic surgery, that's another step away, and I needed to understand it. I also found out the organization had kind of drifted away from knowing what was going on in the market. And IDEO has done, basically, you have something they designed on you right now. There is no doubt you probably have 2 or 3 things they've designed on you right now, or because they do medical devices in you. So they've learned how to innovate over a number of years. These are their 7 pitfalls. If you think the idea is inside your organization rather than outside of it, that can be a pitfall. If you think that, and that can also be, if you think the grumpy cat in your organization is smart enough to know, that can be a pitfall. Because that person often is just imposing ego and not imposing facts. If you spend time talking about it rather than building it, that can be a pitfall. The main reason is that building it informs. As soon as you start to build something, you start to learn about where it's headed, where it's going. Even drawing it can be part of building it. And that's why when I started at JBJS, we immediately installed whiteboards in a lot of places, because the impulse to stand up and go, this is what I mean, is really great to support. You need to do that. Executing when you should be exploring. It's really tempting to say, we've got a little bit of an idea, let's make that. Well, keep talking, keep working at it, see how it goes. For Boston, I modified this, being smart. That's a real problem. So, as I mentioned, sometimes people just want to show how smart they are. And I'll talk a little bit about this later. You don't have to be smart. You need to deliver product. That's what you need to do. You're not trying to get into some sort of contest about who has the bigger brain. It's who's going to deliver. Okay? It only counts if it ships. Being impatient for the wrong things, I put a period at the end of that so it could drive all the editors in the room nuts. And also emphasize that sometimes you will actually, I've actually experienced this, you will have a great idea and somebody will be like, you should have used the subjunctive. There's a great Dilbert cartoon where they say, we've got a great idea out of engineering, it's going to change the world, but whatever you do, don't talk about the color. And they bring it into the room and they go, why is it green? Impatient for the wrong things. Confusing cross-functional with diverse perspectives. Sometimes you can have a monoculture in an organization, and you think because you're going to talk to marketing, and then you're going to talk to business development, and then you're going to talk to some other area editorial, that you're talking to diverse perspectives. But if you've actually created a single culture, you're just talking to that culture. You need to go out and get diverse perspectives. And that goes back to point one. And then believing the process will save you. You need to mess with the process. You need to have as light a process, to the point John made about light bureaucracy. You need to have, you can't say that there's a way to do this. You need to sort of feel your way through each one. Each one's different. That's innovation. 4 ways to lead it. That's how simple it is. Share purpose and direction. I think we've said that a couple of times. This is the biggest point. Give permission. And I use the word permission a lot in my leadership style. Let's give ourselves permission to do this. Let's permit ourselves to think this way. Provide support and commit. And that gets back to light bureaucracy and decision making and leadership. I'll talk a little bit about more these two. So there are 2 keys to business: positioning and execution. Positioning is how you address your market and what you address it with, and execution is how good you are at delivering it. It's that simple. If anybody tells you otherwise, don't listen to them. We have a portfolio management approach inside Striatus that has 3 bins. Baseline operations, that's what we do day in, day out. It's very active, but it's not a lot of change going on there. It's about how efficient it can be. Then we have more coordination, communication around operational enhancements. Those are things we want to change to make ourselves execute better. And what we call enterprise development, you might call R&D, where we start building new things. And if you want to overlay that model, we have 2 that are based on improving on either execution or improving execution, and 1 that's based on improving and changing our positioning in the market. Okay. This is a slide IDEO uses a lot, because what they look for are breakthroughs. A lot of the tendency in a culture of an organization that's fairly staid is to look at the middle of the bell curve. What are most people doing? What's really neat about what IDEO does is they look at the ends. They say, what's underserved, and what are your happiest users? What do they want next? What are they hungry for? And that's where you're going to get breakthroughs. And to impose that same structure, I think that this is about execution. You look at the middle. What can we do better for the most people? But then how do we change position? Okay, what's underserved, or what do our biggest fans want next, right? I was watching a story the other day about the guy who, the boxing announcer. It was on Real Sports with Brian Gumbel. And he's the one who says, let's get ready to rumble! So he had throat cancer. He had to deal with an execution issue. But then somebody came along who was the biggest fan of him. It turned out to be his long-lost brother, because he was giving away his foster care and all this stuff. Turned out to be his long-lost brother, and his long-lost brother was his biggest fan. He was the guy at the far right. And he said, let's start merchandising that. They made millions of dollars. So that was the breakthrough. That kind of thing, those people will tell you kind of, this is how much we love this. We'll take it further. So one of the ways we gave ourselves permission was to create a framework for innovation. And that was partly to create a divisional model, to say, okay, here is what was the business of a journal, now we're a business with a journal. If you're a business with a journal, you're structured differently. You have a journals branch. There are other things we do with our mission. We do education. And now, because it's a digital age, and we do things like peer review, and we worry about evidence, quality of evidence, we do data. So we gave ourselves permission to actually consider data products. And that came in a very timely way. I'll tell you about that in a minute as well. There's so much you're going to learn in just a minute. This is my favorite quote that I made up and attributed to Anonymous. So, it's not science, it's product development. But in our cultures, we often find that. You only got a 15% response rate. That's not scientifically valid. It doesn't have to be. It's product development. What does it tell us inside of that? You only talk to 3 focus groups of 8 people. Yeah, but here's what we learned. And a lot of people get sort of bothered by that. But in product development, it's what you learn and what you glean and what you think about and what you contemplate and what you take next and what you iterate, and I'll talk a little bit about that. It's not science, it's product development. So there are lots of models for this. You'll find them around. This is one that I kind of like. You start with ideas or concepts. Product development infrastructure is really important. At my organization, in the bylaws, we have 5% of a rolling 3-year average of our retained earnings that we can use to explore new areas. That's part of our infrastructure. It's a funding part. If you don't have that, get it. We also created a small team that met every week when it was first started. Now it meets every 2 weeks. It's called the Enterprise Development Group. And we go through and we talk about what's new. It includes the editor, it includes myself, it includes my general manager, Mady Tissenbaum, and the associate publisher. It includes a couple of other people, our portfolio manager, our developmental editor. And we talk about these things. We bring in other people as we need. We keep it going. It is an activity, but it's not terribly well defined. And then what are you trying to do, essentially, at the top? And so you get ideas, you triage them into the infrastructure. You take the infrastructure and what you want to build prototypes for, you build, you show them to people, you learn what you need to improve, and you go right around and around and around. That's product development. The other thing I always try to convey is that even you can do this with current products. To me, there is no, if you have a perfect product, raise your hand. If you have a finished prototype, that's what you have. You have a static prototype for something else. You do not have a finished, perfect product. Every product can be improved. Everything can go through this. Everything is essentially ideas and concepts. So, this is I just show this slide out of habit. I don't need to even describe it to you. Leadership is really important. Persistence, patience is really important. Patience is really, really important. And that not only is a temperament, but it's about resiliency, it's about persistence, it's about understanding that a bump in the road is a bump in the road. Okay? So this is the organization in 2014. In 2010, we had 1 product. 2014, we have 10. All but the newest are profitable. We have journals, we have education, we have data, much more digital. And the interesting thing when like I said, we gave ourselves permission to contemplate data. And a few weeks, literally, after that happened, I got a call from a guy named Adam Etkin, and he said, I've got this really interesting idea I'm trying to, run by people, and you're kind of, you pretend you're smart, so can you give me some advice? And he described it to me, and I said, well, actually, we now have given ourselves permission to think about products like this. I want to work with you on this. If we hadn't given ourselves permission, I would have had a 15-minute phone call, and he would have gone some other way. But because we gave ourselves permission, we had the selectivity bias there. So we could see that this was an opportunity before we might have been blind to it or just have thought it was out of scope. So that's important. What permission you give yourself to do is really, it's up here. A lot of this is just up there. So how to control this in a loose way? What I found succeeds is you use a phased approach. Say, okay, well, for phase one, we're going to do this. Phase one, we want to get it to the point where we can show it to somebody, or we can have gotten it in a wireframe, or we will have gotten to this point, and you set a deadline. We do it by this date. Okay, that's phase one, and then we'll see we'll decide what phase two is. You set expectations, like I said, and then you have to be patient. You know, it may take 5 phases before you get to the point where you're actually right, and you need to keep thinking. I think what John said about, you know, being flexible and being attentive and being in tune, you really need to pay attention, and if something, this is kind of fun to exercise your gut a little bit, your instincts, because if it doesn't feel right, you need to get back in there and say, okay, this doesn't feel right. And that can go with your current products too. This isn't feeling right anymore. I need to innovate here. And then look for a surprising result. In our discussions, we're bringing up currently Pre-Val and Social Site up to the market. And we've had discussions where all of a sudden somebody will just say something, I'm just like, wow, thank you, that was really great. But you have to be open to that. So we have this, and this is really corny. I'm middle-aged. I get to do this kind of stuff. It's so exciting. Okay, really corny. Oh, not really corny yet. It'll get corny. I changed slides this morning. So let's do this. A little bit of a process. You can describe your own. Part of innovation is innovating the process bit. Okay. This is not the process we use every time. Okay. Sometimes we don't even describe it. We just do it. Have a little bit of a framework. Understand and give a little bit of structure to it. Support it. One of my favorite quotes, it always seems impossible until it's done. And this is the fun part of it, and also the unnerving part of it, is a lot of times, especially the bigger the initiative, and I don't know if Nico can sympathize with this, or John, but sometimes you'll have people just it feels like they're just waiting for you to fail. It's like, oh, I can't wait till he just crashes and burns. And then it comes through. And you never get the, wow, I didn't think you'd do that. You get the, But it always seems impossible until it's done, right? And to me, that's the tightrope walk. That's the guy who crossed the Grand Canyon, right? That's impossible. And then he runs across at the very end, and it's like, nope, it's not. Did it. I collect fortune cookie sayings. I've got them taped to my doorway. This is the most faded one I have because I've had it the longest. It's easier to be critical than to be correct. And product development and innovation is about being correct about something no one else knows the answer to. And it's hard work. But the people who are critical of it take their advice, but remember, they're taking the easy road. You're choosing the harder road. The harder road is to find an answer that nobody else has found. And it's hard to be correct. You're actually searching for something that doesn't exist yet, a question nobody's answered yet. So here's the corny slide. You have to love this, really, because it does take, it takes endurance. You know, you're not going to know. How many people here have run a marathon or done some endurance sport? You do it because you're slightly bent. Because you love something about it, the endorphins, or the sense of accomplishment, or being outdoors, or the way it helps you think, or something, or being fit generally, but you love it. You have to do the same thing with product development. It's a certain cut of the jib. Can you see that? This is the most important thing to me. You can kill product development, you can kill innovation if you make people uptight. Help people relax. So I tell corny jokes, right? Yeah. Let people vent. Keep them on a level playing field, keep them cool. Because the one thing that research, and this is based on research, where do you get your best ideas? Where? Either running or in the shower, right? In a nice hot shower. Why is that? Because your blood vessels open up, you get better blood flow, and if you make people uptight, you get fewer ideas, you get constricted blood flow, and you don't get innovation. So you need a culture that helps people relax, you need leadership that helps people relax, because that's how you get innovation. It's just basic physiology. And finally, don't look back. This one I didn't make up. This is anonymous. You're not going that way. So happy to answer any